So, this is my story how Reddit Let's Not Meet saved me from a predator. To put this into context, I am an 18-year-old girl living in New Zealand. I suffer from anxiety and shut down in stressful situations and become rather overwhelmed when I am not sure how to deal with something. This story happened yesterday whilst I was waiting at my bus station to catch a bus home. I'd had a long day at work and my legs were in pain, and all I wanted to do is get home and watch some YouTube in bed. It was getting dark and the sun was almost completely down. As I was listening to some music in a rather deserted area of the bus station, a man considerably larger than myself sauntered up and sat down directly next to me on the bench, which I didn't think much of. To put this into perspective, I'm roughly 55 kilograms. He must have been at least 100 and could have easily overpowered me. I noticed out of the corner of my eye that this man was staring at me and began to feel a little uncomfortable, but pegged it up to him looking at my mask. It's rather nondescript and just black. I ignored this and acted busy on my phone to avoid talking. As I said, I had a long day at work. The man began to talk, and I pulled out my AirPod to listen to what he was saying to me. The AirPod fell and landed on the ground, to which he picked it up for me, held onto it and stared at it for a few seconds before handing it back to me. I was already getting bad vibes from this man. The conversation went something like this. "Your eyes are beautiful, did you get them from your mum or dad?" "Ah, my mum, I guess." I kept my replies short to try signify I wasn't in the mood for talking, but he continued. "What bus are you catching? Where do you live?" I laughed nervously and told him I didn't feel very comfortable sharing where I lived, but I told him it was farther up north. He then said, "Why? It's not like I'm going to force something on you. Isn't it really fancy up there?" This was where I began to feel seriously uncomfortable and began to shake. He asked if I had a boyfriend, to which I said yes, and he proceeded to ask if I planned to marry him, to which I laughed and said yes. "Oh, it kind of sounds like you're just rooting him. Are you sure you want to marry him?" I was shocked and looked at him before telling him, again, yes. I do plan to marry my partner. "How old are you?" I don't know what came over me, but I told him I was 21 to try make it come across that I was old enough to stand up for myself. "Are you on the pill?" "I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable sharing that and don't see why you need to know that. Oh, so you use condoms instead?" I wanted to walk away, but I was grounded to the bench and couldn't move a muscle if I tried. I was uncomfortable and confused as to why he was asking these questions. "Do you have someone waiting for you at the bus stop, or are you walking home? How far do you live from the bus stop?" This is the question that made everything click into place, and I realized this guy has a malicious intent. He's not being friendly. This man is going to follow me home and either force himself on me or kidnap me. I started to really panic and started desperately looking for onlookers. A young man, possibly my age, walked out of the public bathroom last and had overheard these conversations and was looking at the predator rather skeptically. I knew then I'd at least have someone to help if I just asked for it. I didn't. By this point, I recalled a video from Reddit about a highly pregnant woman and her daughter being followed to their car in an empty car park in the dark by an older man. This lady was stressfully trying to find her keys in her purse as this man was standing beside her daughters on the opposite side of the car making small talk with them. He got impatient and had walked away before she'd found her keys. Someone commented on her submission saying this was a popular thing, and that he was waiting for her to unlock the car so he could get in and control her via threats of her children. It occurred to me that I should skip my bus and catch another one at a later time. I did this exactly. He kept trying to ask where I live, and I continued to refuse telling him where. He also continued to ask how far I live from the stop and if my partner was waiting for me. I deflected all his questions, and after 40 minutes, he began to get grumpy and walked away from the station. He wasn't there to catch a bus at all, but to prey on young women at a bus stop. I caught my bus about 10 minutes after he left and I ran home, where I completely broke down and cried in the arms of my partner. This morning I was so stressed I contemplated taking the day off work and staying in bed the rest of the day. I was petrified. I didn't, I'm at work posting this. After that, I've definitely decided that perhaps, Reddit, let's not meet. So, this is my story how Reddit Let's Not Meet saved me from a predator. To put this into context, I am an 18-year-old girl living in New Zealand. I suffer from anxiety and shut down in stressful situations and become rather overwhelmed when I am not sure how to deal with something. This story happened yesterday whilst I was waiting at my bus station to catch a bus home. I'd had a long day at work and my legs were in pain and all I wanted to do is get home and watch some YouTube in bed. It was getting dark and the sun was almost completely down. As I was listening to some music in a rather deserted area of the bus station, a man considerably larger than myself sauntered up and sat down directly next to me on the bench, which I didn't think much of. To put this into perspective, I'm roughly 55 kilograms. He must have been at least 100 and could have easily overpowered me. I noticed out of the corner of my eye that this man was staring at me and began to feel a little uncomfortable, but pegged it up to him looking at my mask. It's rather nondescript and just black. I ignored this and acted busy on my phone to avoid talking. As I said, I had a long day at work. The man began to talk, and I pulled out my AirPod to listen to what he was saying to me. The AirPod fell and landed on the ground, to which he picked it up for me, held onto it and stared at it for a few seconds before handing it back to me. I was already getting bad vibes from this man. The conversation went something like this. "Your eyes are beautiful, did you get them from your mum or dad?" "Ah, my mum, I guess." I kept my replies short to try signify I wasn't in the mood for talking, but he continued. "What bus are you catching? Where do you live?" I laughed nervously and told him I didn't feel very comfortable sharing where I lived, but I told him it was farther up north. He then said, "Why? It's not like I'm going to force something on you. Isn't it really fancy up there?" This was where I began to feel seriously uncomfortable and began to shake. He asked if I had a boyfriend, to which I said yes, and he proceeded to ask if I planned to marry him, to which I laughed and said yes. "Oh, it kind of sounds like you're just rooting him. Are you sure you want to marry him?" I was shocked and looked at him before telling him, again, yes. I do plan to marry my partner. "How old are you?" I don't know what came over me, but I told him I was 21 to try make it come across that I was old enough to stand up for myself. "Are you on the pill?" "I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable sharing that and don't see why you need to know that. Oh, so you use condoms instead?" I wanted to walk away, but I was grounded to the bench and couldn't move a muscle if I tried. I was uncomfortable and confused as to why he was asking these questions. "Do you have someone waiting for you at the bus stop, or are you walking home? How far do you live from the bus stop?" This is the question that made everything click into place, and I realized this guy has a malicious intent. He's not being friendly. This man is going to follow me home and either force himself on me or kidnap me. I started to really panic and started desperately looking for onlookers. A young man, possibly my age, walked out of the public bathroom last and had overheard these conversations and was looking at the predator rather skeptically. I knew then I'd at least have someone to help if I just asked for it. I didn't. By this point, I recalled a video from Reddit about a highly pregnant woman and her daughter being followed to their car in an empty car park in the dark by an older man. This lady was stressfully trying to find her keys in her purse as this man was standing beside her daughters on the opposite side of the car making small talk with them. He got impatient and had walked away before she'd found her keys. Someone commented on her submission saying this was a popular thing, and that he was waiting for her to unlock the car so he could get in and control her via threats of her children. It occurred to me that I should skip my bus and catch another one at a later time. I did this exactly. He kept trying to ask where I live, and I continued to refuse telling him where. He also continued to ask how far I live from the stop and if my partner was waiting for me. I deflected all his questions, and after 40 minutes, he began to get grumpy and walked away from the station. He wasn't there to catch a bus at all, but to prey on young women at a bus stop. I caught my bus about 10 minutes after he left, and I ran home, where I completely broke down and cried in the arms of my partner. This morning I was so stressed I contemplated taking the day off work and staying in bed the rest of the day. I was petrified. I didn't, I'm at work posting this. After that, I've definitely decided that perhaps Reddit, let's not meet.
When I was 5 years old, I went to an elementary school that, from what I've come to understand, was really adamant about the importance of learning through activity. It was part of a new program designed to allow children to rise at their own pace, and to facilitate this, the school encouraged teachers to come up with really inventive lesson plans. Each teacher was given the latitude to create his or her own themes which would run for the duration of the grade, and all the lessons in math, reading, etc. would be designed in the spirit of the theme. These themes were called groups. There was a space group, a sea group, an earth group, and the group I was in, community. In kindergarten in this country, you don't learn much except how to tie your shoes and how to share, so most of it isn't very memorable. I only remember two things very clearly. I was the best at writing my name the right way, and the balloon project, which was really the hallmark of the community group, since it was a pretty clever way to show how a community functioned at a really basic level. You've probably heard of this activity. On one Friday, I remember it being Friday because I was excited about the project and it being the end of the week. Toward the beginning of the year, we walked into the classroom in the morning and saw that there was a fully inflated balloon tied off with string taped to each of our desks. Sitting on each of our desks was a marker, a pen, a piece of paper, and an envelope. The project was to write a note on the paper, put it in the envelope, and attach it to the balloon, which we could draw a picture on if we wanted. Most of the kids started fighting over the balloons because they wanted different colors, but I started on my note, which I had thought a lot about. All the notes had to follow a loose structure, but we were allowed to be creative within those boundaries. My note was something like this. Hi, you found my balloon. My name is Lawrence, and I attend St. Francis Elementary School. You can keep the balloon, but I hope you write me back. I like Mighty Max, exploring, building forts, swimming, and friends. What do you like? Write me back soon. Here's $1 for the mail. On the dollar I wrote for stamps, right across the front, which my mom said was unnecessary, but I thought it was genius, so I did it. The teacher took a Polaroid of each of us with our balloons and had us put them in the envelope along with our letter. They also included another letter that I assume explained the nature of the project and sincere appreciation for anyone's participation in writing back and sending photos of their city or neighborhood. That was the whole idea, to build a sense of community without having to leave the school and to establish safe contact with other people. It seemed like such a fun idea. Over the next couple weeks, the letters started to roll in. Most came with pictures of different landmarks, and each time a letter would come in, the teacher would pin the picture on a big wall map we had put up showing where the letter had come from and how far the balloon had traveled. It was a really smart idea, because we actually looked forward to coming to school to see if we had gotten our letter. For the duration of the year, we had 1 day a week where we could write back to our pen pal or another student's pen pal in case our letter hadn't come in yet. Mine was one of the last to arrive. When I came into the classroom, I looked at my desk and once again didn't see any letter waiting for me. But as I sat down, the teacher approached me and handed me an envelope. I must have looked so excited because as I was about to open it, she put her hand on mine to stop me and said, "Please don't be upset." I didn't understand what she meant. Why would I be upset now that my letter had come? Initially, I was mystified that she would even know what was in the envelope, but now I realized that of course the teachers had screened the contents to make sure there was nothing obscene, but all the same, how could I be disappointed? When I opened the envelope, I understood. There was no letter. The only thing in the envelope was a Polaroid, but I couldn't really make out what it was. It looked like a patch of desert, but it was too blurry to decipher. It appeared as if the camera had been moved while the picture was being taken. There was no return address, so I couldn't even write back if I wanted to. I was crushed. The school year pressed on, and the letters had stopped coming for nearly all of the other students. After all, you can only continue a written correspondence with a kindergartner for so long. Everyone, including myself, had lost interest in the letters almost completely. Then I got another envelope. My excitement was rejuvenated, and I reveled in the fact that I was still getting a letter when most of the other pen pals had abandoned their involvement. It made sense that I received another delivery. There had been nothing but a blurry picture in the first one, so this was probably to make up for that. But again, there was no letter at all. Just another picture. This one was more distinguishable, but I still didn't understand it. The photograph was angled way up, catching the top corner of a building, and the rest of the image was distorted by a lens flare from the sun. Because the balloons didn't travel very far, and because they were all launched on the same day, the board became a bit cluttered, and so the policy for the students still exchanging letters became that they could take the photographs home. My best friend Josh had the second highest number of pictures taken home by the end of the year. His pen pal was really cooperative and sent him pictures from all around the neighboring city. Josh took home, I think, for pictures. I took home nearly 50. The envelopes were all opened by the teacher, but after a while I stopped even looking at the pictures, however. I saved them in one of my drawers that housed my collections of rocks, baseball cards, comic book cards, Marvel metal cards, for those who might remember, and little miniature baseball batting helmets that I'd get out of a vending machine at Winn-Dixie after T-ball games. With the school year over, my attention turned to other things. My mom had gotten me a small snow cone machine for Christmas that year, and Josh had really coveted it. So much so that his parents bought him a slightly nicer one for his birthday, which was toward the end of the school year. That summer we had the idea that we would set up a snow cone stand to make money. We thought we'd make a fortune selling snow cones at $1. Josh lived in a different neighborhood, but we eventually decided that my neighborhood would be better because there were a lot of people who cared for their lawns. The yards in my neighborhood were slightly bigger. We did this for 5 weekends in a row until my mom told us that we had to stop, and I've only recently come to understand why she did that. On the 5th weekend, Josh and I were counting our money. Because we both had a machine, we each had a separate stack of money that we put together into one stack, and we then split it evenly. We had made a total of $16 that day, and as Josh paid out my 5th dollar, a feeling of profound surprise consumed me. The dollar said for stamps. Josh noticed my shock and asked if he had miscounted. I told him about the dollar, and he said, "That's so cool, man." As I thought about it, I came to agree. The idea that the dollar had made it right back to me after changing so many hands floored me. I rushed inside to tell my mom, but my excitement coupled with her being distracted by a phone call made my story incomprehensible, and she responded simply by saying, "Oh wow, that's neat." Frustrated, I ran back outside and told Josh I had something to show him. Back in my room, I opened the drawer and took out the stack of envelopes and showed him some of the pictures. I started with the first picture, and we went through about 10 before Josh lost interest and asked if I wanted to go play in the ditch, a dirt ditch down the street from my house, before his mom came to pick him up, so that's what we did. We had a dirt war for a while, but it was interrupted several times by rustling in the woods around us. There were raccoons and stray cats that lived in there, but this was making a little too much noise, and we traded guesses at what it was in an attempt to scare each other. My last guess was that it was a mummy, but in the end Josh kept insisting that it was a robot because of the sounds that we heard. Before we left, he got a little serious and looked me right in the eyes and said, "You heard it, didn't you? It sounded like a robot." "You heard it too, right?" I had heard it, and since it sounded mechanical, I agreed that it was probably a robot. It's only now that I understand what we heard. When we got back, Josh's mom was waiting for him at the kitchen table with my mom. Josh told his mom about the robot. Our moms laughed, and Josh went home. My mom and I ate dinner, and then I went to bed. I didn't stay in bed for long before I crept out and decided that, due to the day's events, I would revisit the envelopes since now the whole affair seemed much more interesting. I took the first envelope and set it on the floor and set the blurry desert Polaroid on top. I laid the second envelope right next to it and placed the oddly angled Polaroid of a building's top corner on top, and did this with each picture until they formed a grid that was about 5 by 10. I was always taught to be careful with things that I was collecting even if I wasn't sure they were valuable. I noticed that the pictures gradually became more decipherable. There was a tree with a bird on it, a speed limit sign, power line, a group of people walking into some building. And then I saw something that vexed me so powerfully that I can now, as I write this, distinctly remember feeling dizzy and capable of only a single, repeating thought. Why am I in this picture? In this photograph of the group of people entering the building, I saw myself holding hands with my mother in the very back of the crowd of people. We were at the very edge of the photo, but it was undeniably us. And as my eyes swam over the sea of Polaroids, I became increasingly anxious. It was a really odd feeling. It wasn't fear, it was the feeling you get when you are in trouble. I'm not sure why I was flooded with that feeling, but there I sat floundering in the distinct sense that I had done something wrong. And this feeling only intensified as I looked on at the rest of the photos after that, the one that had so powerfully struck me. I was in every photo. None of them were close shots. None of them were only of me. But I was in every single one of them, off to the side in the back bottom of the frame. Some of them only had the tiniest part of my face captured at the very edge of the photo, but nevertheless, I was there. I was always there. I didn't know what to do. Your mind works in funny ways as a kid, but there was a large part of me that was afraid of getting in trouble simply for still being up. Since I already had the looming feeling of having done something wrong, I decided that I would wait until tomorrow. The next day, my mom was off work and spent most of the morning cleaning up around the house. I watched cartoons, I imagine, and waited until I thought it was a good time to show her the Polaroids. When she went out to get the mail, I grabbed a couple of the pictures and put them on the table in front of me as I sat waiting for her to come back in. When returned, she was already opening the mail and threw some junk mail into the trash can, and I said, "Mom, can you come here for a second? I have these pictures. Just give me a minute, honey. I need to mark these on the calendar." After a minute or two, she came and stood behind me and asked me what I needed. I could hear her shuffling with the mail behind me, but I just looked at the Polaroids and told her about them. As I explained more and pointed to the pictures, her frequent ahs and okays decreased, and she was suddenly completely quiet and only making a little noise with the mail. The next noise I heard from her sounded as if she was trying to catch her breath in a room that had no air left in it. At last, her struggling gasps were conquered. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know about these. Don't be mad at me." With the phone pressed to her ear, she was walking/running back and forth and shouting into it. I nervously fiddled with the mail sitting next to my Polaroids. The top envelope had something sticking out of it that I thoughtlessly and anxiously pulled on until it came out. It was another Polaroid. Confused, I thought that somehow one of my Polaroids had slipped into the stack when she threw the mail down, but when I turned it over and looked at it, I realized that I had not seen this one before. To my dismay, it was me, but this one was a much closer shot. I was surrounded by trees and was smiling. But it wasn't just me, I noticed. Josh was there too. This was us from yesterday. I started yelling for my mom, who was still screaming into the phone. I repeatedly yelled for her until she finally responded with, "What?" And I could only think to ask, "Who are you calling?" "I'm talking with the police, honey." "But why?" "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do anything." She answered me with a response that I never understood until I was forced to revisit these events from the earliest years of my life. She grabbed the envelope off the table, and the picture of Josh and I spun and slid, landing next to the other Polaroids in front of me. She held the envelope up to my eyes, but I could only look at her and watch as all the color began draining out of her face. With tears welling up in her eyes, she said that she had to call the police because there was no postmark on the envelope. In a quiet room, if you press your ear against a pillow, you can hear your heartbeat. As a 6-year-old kid, the muffled, rhythmic beats sounded like soft footsteps on a carpeted floor. And so as a kid, almost every night, just as I was about to drift off to sleep, I would hear these footsteps and I would be ripped back to consciousness, terrified. For my entire childhood, I lived with my mother in a fairly nice neighborhood that was in a transitional phase. People of lower economic means were gradually moving in, and my mother and I were two of these people. We lived in the kind of house you see being transported in 2 pieces on the interstate, but my mom took good care of it. There were a lot of woods surrounding the neighborhood. I would play in and explore during the day, but at night, as things often do to a kid, they took on a more sinister feeling. This coupled with the fact that due to the nature of our house, there was a fairly large crawl space underneath. It filled my mind with imaginary monsters and inescapable scenarios, which would consume my thoughts when I was awoken by the footsteps. I told my mom about the footsteps, and she said that I was just imagining things. I persisted enough that she blasted my ears with water from a turkey baster once just to placate me, since I thought that would help. Of course it didn't. Despite all the creepiness and footsteps, the only weird thing that ever happened was that every now and then I would wake up on the bottom bunk despite having gone to sleep on the top. But this wasn't really weird since I'd sometimes get up to piss or get something to drink and could remember just going back to sleep on the bottom bunk. I'm an only child, so it didn't matter. This would happen once or twice a week, but waking up on the bottom bunk wasn't too terrifying. But one night I didn't wake up on the bottom bunk. I had heard the footsteps, but was too far gone to be woken up by them. And when I was awoken, it wasn't from the sound of footsteps or a nightmare, but because I was cold. Really cold. When I opened my eyes, I saw stars. I was in the woods. I sat up immediately and tried to figure out what was going on. I thought I was dreaming, but that didn't seem right, though neither did me being in the woods. There was a deflated pool float right in front of me, one of those ones shaped like a shark. This only added to the surreal feeling, but after a while it seemed like I just wasn't going to wake up because I wasn't asleep. I stood up to orient myself, but I didn't recognize these woods. I played in the woods by my house all the time, and so I knew them really well, but if these weren't the same woods, then how could I get out? I took a step and felt a shooting pain in my foot, which knocked me back to where I had just been laying. I had stepped on a thorn. By the light of the moon, I could see that they were everywhere. I looked at my other foot, but it was fine, and as a matter of fact, so was the rest of me. I didn't have another scratch on me, and I wasn't even that dirty. I cried for a little bit, and then stood back up. I didn't know which way to go, so I just picked a direction. I resisted the urge to call out since I wasn't sure I wanted to be found by who or what might be out there. I walked for what seemed like hours. I tried to walk in a straight line and tried to course correct when I had to take detours, but I was a kid and I was afraid. There weren't any howls or screams, and only once did I hear any noise that scared me. It sounded like a crying baby. I think now that it was just a cat, but I panicked. I ran veering in different directions to avoid big thicks of bushes and collapsed trees. And I was paying close attention to where I stepped because by that point my feet were in pretty bad shape. I paid too much attention to where I was stepping and not enough to where those steps were leading, because not long after hearing the cry I saw something that filled me with a kind of despair I haven't experienced since. It was the pool float. I was only 10 feet from where I had woken up. This wasn't magic or some supernatural space bending. I was lost. Up until that moment, I thought more about getting out of the woods than how I got in, but being back at the beginning caused my mind to swim. I wasn't even sure that these were my woods. I had only been hoping that they were. Had I run in a huge circle around that spot, or did I just get turned around and start making my way back? How was I going to get out? At the time, I thought the North Star was just the brightest star, and so I looked and found the brightest one and followed it. Eventually, things started to look more familiar, and when I saw the ditch, a dirt ditch my friends and I would have dirt-clawed wars in, I knew I had made it out. By that point, I was walking really slowly because my feet hurt so much, but I was so happy to be so close to home that I broke into a light jog. When I actually saw the roof of my house over a neighboring, lower-set house, I let out a light sob and ran faster. I just wanted to be home. I had already decided that I wouldn't say anything because I had no idea what I could possibly say. I would get back in the house somehow, clean up, and get in bed. My heart sunk as I rounded the corner, and my house came fully into view. Every light in the house was on. I knew my mom was up, and I knew I would have to explain, or try to explain, where I had been, and I couldn't even figure out where to start. My run became a jog, which became a walk. I saw her silhouette through the blinds, and although I was worried about how to explain things to her that didn't matter to me at that point, I walked up the couple of steps to the porch and put my hand on the doorknob and turned. Right before I pushed it open, two arms wrapped around me and pulled me back. I screamed as loud as I could. "Mom, help me, please, Mom." The feeling of being so close to being safe and then being physically pulled away from it filled me with a kind of dread that is, even after all these years, indescribable. The door I had been torn away from opened, and a flash of hope shot through my heart. But it wasn't my mom. It was a man, and he was enormous. I thrashed around and kicked at the shins of the person holding me while also trying to get away from the person who had just come out of my house. I was scared, but I was furious. Let me go. Where is she? Where's my MOM? What did you do to her? As my throat stung from screaming, and I was drawing in another breath, I became aware of a sound that had been present for longer than I had perceived it. Honey, please calm down. I've got you. It sounded like my mom. The arms loosened and set me down, and as man approaching me blocked out the porch light with his head, I noticed his clothes. He was a cop. I turned to face the voice behind me and saw that it really was my mom. Everything was okay. I began to cry, and the three of us went inside. I'm so glad you're home, sweetie. I was worried I'd never see you again. By that point, she was crying too. I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. I just wanted to come home. I'm sorry. It's okay. Just don't ever do that again. I'm not sure me or my shins could take it. A little laughter broke through my sobs, and I smiled a bit. Well, I'm sorry for kicking you, but why'd you have to grab me like that? I was just afraid that you'd run away again. I was confused. What do you mean? We found your note on your pillow, she said, and pointed at the piece of paper that the police officer was sliding across the table. I picked up the note and read it. It was a running away letter. It said that I was unhappy, never wanted to see her or any of my friends again. The police officer exchanged a few words with my mom on the porch while I stared at the letter. I didn't remember writing a letter. I didn't remember anything about any of this. But even if I sometimes went to the bathroom at night and didn't remember, or even if I could have gone into the woods on my own, even if all that could have been true, the only thing I knew at that point was, this isn't how you spell my name. I've come to terms with the fact that everything I know is a dream. As a preface, please note that this will probably be very long. I don't care if nobody reads it. Everyone in the world could read it and nothing would change. I just need to voice my concerns for my own sake. Perhaps by organizing everything on a page, I can make sense of things. Several years ago, I was in a brutal car accident. I was parked in front of a train track, waiting for the train to pass by. I was the last person not to make it across the tracks. For visualization, there was a solid stream of cars on either side. If I had tried to sneak across, I would have rear-ended the person in front of me before successfully clearing them. I could hear the train approaching, and the black and yellow bars lowered in front of me. I am fascinated by trains, so I was delighted to be so close, finally getting a front row seat. The train was about a quarter mile from the crossing when the driver behind me accelerated and nudged me forward a few feet. The bars bent and eventually snapped, and I was knocked joltingly onto the tracks. I panicked and threw the car into reverse, trying to back out. The other car apparently had more horsepower, however, and to my horror my car door aligned perfectly with the cattle guard on the front of the train. I scrambled to get out of the car, but forgot about my seatbelt. I nearly strangled myself trying to get free. By the time I unlatched it, it was too late. One fraction of a second of the loudest sound I had ever heard, and then blackness and silence. I was certain that I had died. I didn't feel any pain, and certainly if I had survived, I'd be in agony. I tried to open my eyes, but nothing would happen. I tried to make a sound, to wiggle my fingers, or do anything, but I couldn't. It wasn't that I was paralyzed. It was more like I didn't have a body to manipulate. I was just a mind submerged in a pool of nothing. The only sentiment I felt was that I had returned to that state after being gone for a long time, like forgetting how your parents' house smells until you visit home for the holidays. Gradually, I started to have feelings of sensation. Passing waves of warmth and wetness finally allowed me to determine where the edges of my body were. Almost as soon as I became aware of my physical self, it began to ache. I felt as if every inch of me had been pummeled with a baseball bat, the heavy wooden kind. Even opening my eyes was a spectacular ordeal. I was in a hospital, so I had survived after all. People moved to surround me. Faces that never fully came into focus hovered above my own, and sounds that vaguely resembled speech seemed to reach me through water. It wasn't long before I felt weak again, and my eyes closed. This fading in and out of consciousness lasted for what felt like a very long time, maybe months, though the doctors told me it was only a matter of days. After that, I worked on speaking and swallowing food, which seems silly, but it was actually a challenge at the time. Finally, as more and more casts were removed, I was allowed to sit up and turn my head. for which I was incredibly grateful. According to my family and my then girlfriend Sarah, all of whom were overjoyed at being able to speak with me, I was asleep for several days on end after the crash. I remember Sarah specifically saying she had missed being able to stare at those beautiful eyes. Time passed at an excruciatingly slow pace until physical therapy finally escalated to the point where I could be pushed around in a wheelchair. The doctors were surprisingly hopeful that I'd be able to walk again, but it was what they called cautious optimism. Nobody wanted to tell me I could be independent again, and then have to admit they were wrong later. Obviously, I was very hopeful myself, though even transferring from chair to bed was a painful challenge. It was around this time that I noticed I never dreamed anymore. When I slept, I only felt the same nothingness that I felt immediately after the crash. All the days blended together for a while after that. The next memory I can actually separate from the rest is the first time I tried walking on my own. There were staff members holding on to my arms and waist, just in case I fell, and with their help, I made it all the way across the room on my first try. The doctors said they had never seen such a rapid recovery. I was giddy. Obviously, I wasn't out of the woods yet, but soon I was allowed to live at home again with frequent PT sessions, and some weeks after that, I returned to work. Life was almost normal for a while, except for a very slight limp in my left leg. The side that the train hit me on, I was feeling pretty normal. It was only after about a month of living in my own house that weird things started to happen. The first thing I noticed was that I felt an occasional stinging on my right forearm, like a thin needle was puncturing my skin. It was a tiny prick, maybe twice a day at most. I figured it was just nerve trauma or something and blocked it from my mind. Feigning ignorance was harder to do when I started hearing things, though. While I was reading in bed one night, I thought I heard Sarah crying. I strained my ears to make sure, and I definitely heard her sobs, but very distantly, like I was submerged in a pool. I made my way downstairs quickly, concerned that she had hurt herself or something, but she was just washing dishes in the kitchen. "Are you okay?" I asked cautiously. "Yeah, why?" She asked nonchalantly. "No reason." I dismissed these oddities as best I could. After all, how could anyone expect to recover from being hit by a goddamn train without some lingering effects? Every so often, mostly when I was trying to fall asleep or sitting in a silent room, I would hear occasional sounds that I couldn't connect at first. Gradually, I determined that they were hospital sound stretchers being rolled across tiled floors, beeping from machines, rapid chatter between nurses and doctors. Although I figured anyone who had suffered as much trauma as I had would experience some degree of whatever I was experiencing, I decided to bring it up with my doctor. He told me it was perfectly normal for someone in my circumstances, and he could prescribe me a sleep aid if I felt it was necessary. I told him it wasn't a big deal. I was just satisfied that a doctor could explain my symptoms. The odd glimpses of what seemed to be my past only increased in frequency. When I slept, I finally dreamed again, but it was always the same thing. If I saw anything at all, it was a hospital room. Sometimes there were other people in the room, and sometimes I was alone with the machines. There was one night in particular in which the dream was more vivid and gripping than usual. My eyes opened wearily to see Sarah asleep on the chair beside my hospital bed. "Sarah," I croaked. She jerked awake. "Henry." She scrambled to my side, clutching my hand. At this point, it occurred to me that I was dreaming. I stared right into Sarah's eyes. "I'm asleep right now." She seemed concerned. "No, Henry. You're finally awake. I'm right here. It's been so long." "Of course you would say that. You're a part of my dream." I smiled, amused. "I'll probably wake up any second." But as I spoke, the familiar soreness caught up to me all at once. It practically knocked the wind from my lungs. "Henry, no." Her distress was now evident. "I don't know what you're talking about. Stay with me, Henry. Stay awake. Look at me." I shook my head defiantly and closed my eyes. When I opened them, I was back in my own bed. It was about 3 a.m. in the morning. I sat awake, pondering what I had just seen. I thought I heard Sarah crying again, even though I could see her sleeping beside me. When Sarah finally woke up, she rolled over and laid an arm across my chest. "Good morning, big guy." She smiled groggily. "If I was asleep right now, would you tell me?" I asked. "What?" She chuckled. "That's kind of heavy stuff to drop on a sleepy person. Just bear with me. If I was asleep right now dreaming, would you tell me?" "Well, I feel pretty real," she noted, patting different parts of her body. "Do you think I'm not real?" Of course not, I said. We got ready for our day. I couldn't stop thinking about my dream, though. I noticed that when I tried really hard to space out at work and listened closely enough, I could hear the hospital sounds more clearly. I was naturally concerned about this. That night, I went to bed early, and just as I thought, I was transported immediately to the hospital bed. I felt the thin sheets beneath my fingers. I opened my eyes, and Sarah was reading a book in the same chair as before. I just looked at her for a long time, trying to discern if she was real. She certainly seemed real enough. She turned pages with the same flourish that she always had and chewed on one of the temples of her reading glasses. Eventually, she looked up and met my eyes. "You're awake again," she gasped. "Victoria, Paul, he's awake." My parents entered the room moments later, looking excited. I talked with them all for a long time. Of course, my parents, too, denied the fact that I was asleep, but that topic passed quickly. Instead, we discussed my condition. I had been in a coma for almost 3 months with little response. They had been slowly losing hope for my recovery until my brain showed signs of activity. Since that time, they had been visiting me frequently, hoping that I would wake up. It seemed a pretty convincing story. After many hours of talking, I had to stop. I was legitimately sleepy. Of course, they all understood, and I fell back asleep. Only this time, I didn't wake up in my own bed. I woke up in the same hospital bed a few hours later. I had to think about it for a very long time, but eventually concluded that I must have imagined my miraculous recovery and had been in a coma the whole time after all. As you can imagine, it was hard to accept at first. Since then, I have been making a second recovery, which has been slower and less successful than the first. That's why, for a long time, I was mostly convinced that I'm really awake this time. Nobody walks after getting blindsided by a train, at least not without lots of hard work. I've still only left my wheelchair on crutches, and it's been 6 years. It probably sounds like a bittersweet ending, and at one point I agreed. I was prepared to live happily ever after in my wheelchair, and maybe even graduate to crutches someday, except for one thing. When I'm getting ready for bed, after I turn off my lamp and my head hits the pillow, I can still hear them, the faint sounds of a busy hospital. I know that many of you will say, but I'm real. This is real life. Of course you're awake. But that's what you're supposed to say. Nobody's going to tell me I'm fake. You're dreaming, wake up. I'm still asleep, and I've learned to deal with it. I know that nobody I meet during the day is real, but I'm tired, so I just pretend, and that will have to do. Don't turn off the webcam. Lynn and I met in 2008. She was from a very small town in Washington with a population of less than 500. I was working my way through college as an event bartender in Portland. Lynn's cousin was getting married in Portland, and as fate would have it, the wedding reception was held at an upscale hotel on the Columbia River where I frequently tended to small wine and beer bars. I noticed her immediately, as I often notice women that I quickly convince myself are too beautiful to ever date someone like me. Eventually, as the night went on, she made her way over to my bar and ordered a white wine. We talked for a while about Portland. I sweated profusely, as I tend to do around girls like her. She would be spending the next 2 days in the city, and I took a few moments telling her about the most interesting sights to see and things to do in town. "Wow, you should just be my personal tour guide," she said, grabbing my arm and smiling. This happened to me so infrequently that I really had no idea how to react, so I just mumbled, "Sure, what time?" and laughed nervously to hedge in the event that she was joking. "How about 10:30 tomorrow morning?" she replied. And so started my relationship with Lynn. She was infectious, with a personality that was so innocent and warm. I immediately fell in love with her. There were a few issues that we would have to work through. She was still in Washington, and I was finishing school in Oregon. Lynn was Vietnamese with a very traditional father who would never approve of her having a white boyfriend. She lived alone in a house with her father, as her mother had passed away several years earlier. So going to Yarrow Point to visit her was out of the question. She would come to see me every 3 weeks under the guise of a prestigious internship program. Being in a long-distance relationship, we spoke on the phone and texted constantly. When high-speed internet finally came to her small town in Washington, I surprised her with a webcam for her computer so we could have an even better means of long-distance communication. In the back of my mind, I was always looking for ways to be with her, as even after 2 years of dating, I was paranoid a girl as beautiful as her would eventually find somebody better to share her life with. In 2010, Lynn's father passed away suddenly in his sleep from a heart attack. He was everything to her, and she was heartbroken. When she returned from Florida, where the funeral was held and her father buried, she was all alone in the house where she had lost both of her parents. With Lynn's father deceased, she was open to finally allowing me to come to Washington to see her, which we planned on doing in a few weeks after my college finals. One night during our usual bedtime conversation, Lynn mentioned to me that her father had been acting strangely in the days leading up to his death. She explained that he had taken to checking up on her multiple times throughout the day and night, and scattering religious artifacts throughout the house. This behavior, she said, was highly uncharacteristic of him. Vietnamese culture and religion was something foreign to me, and at various points Lynn had mentioned things like this that I normally wrote off as just being a little silly. She explained to me that being in the house alone without her dad was emotional and maybe playing tricks on her. She hated the feeling of being so alone. She told me that being able to see me on her webcam was the closest thing she had to family, and asked that I promise to never turn off the webcam. She meant the world to me, so I was happy to oblige. A few days passed, and it was now the Tuesday before the weekend when I would finally come to see her in Washington. We spent our bedtime webcam session excitedly talking about our plans, and I dozed off with my head on the kitchen table in mid-conversation. It had been a long day. When I woke up, I saw Lynn sleeping on my screen and stumbled off to bed. At 3 a.m., my cell phone began to ring. Disoriented, I rolled over, took a look at the clock, and knew it could only be her. She took great pleasure in waking me up in the middle of the night to let me know that she had just gotten a drink of water or had an amusing dream. Anyone else would have gotten an earful from me, but her flirtatious giggle made me feel lucky to have my much-needed sleep interrupted. "I had a nightmare," Lynn gasped. "You danced in front of my friends." She burst into laughter. "What are you doing up so late, honey? You've got to work in the morning?" I said. I was thirsty and went downstairs to get a drink of water. "Great, well, we really should go back to sleep. Tomorrow is a big day." "All right," she conceded. "Hey, by the way, don't forg." After a few crackles and a brief burst of static, the call disconnected. I hated Lynn's phone. She had an old flip phone that dropped calls with no rhyme or reason at least 3 times a day. I held down the number 1 on my own phone, my speed dial for Lynn. No ring, straight to voicemail. I tried to call several more times, and each time it again went straight to voicemail. I was exhausted, and though I loved Lynn to death, to be honest, I just wanted to go back to sleep. My eyelids hung heavy. A little annoyed, I decided to walk out to my kitchen for a quick drink of water. The 2 glasses of wine that I drank before bed had left me with a little bit of dry mouth. As I rinsed the glass and went to place it in the dishwasher, out of the corner of my eye I saw movement on the glow of the laptop perched on my dining room table. It was the webcam. 2 fluffy brown paws were making a swimming motion directly in front of her camera. As I got closer, I saw a close-up of 2 grinning faces. One of that silly dog of hers, and the other of my giggling girlfriend, who knew that eventually, after being unable to make phone contact, I would wander out to the webcam to say goodnight. I wouldn't put it past her to turn the phone off on purpose to elaborately stage this scene. Me, standing in my underwear at 3 a.m. on a work night, half asleep staring at a girl and a puppy on a webcam. I waved goodnight, and she kissed the lens of the webcam and pulled away. I froze. I wiped my eyes and looked again. There. It's standing in the corner of the room. It's staring at her. Wrinkled, angry, twisted mouth. Hateful eyes. What the fuck? Hateful eyes. It's watching her. 2 hours later, I woke on the dining room floor. I had a ringing in my ears and a knot on the back of my head. I immediately knew what had happened. It wasn't the first time. Sudden, extreme stress has given me panic attacks and blackouts a few times before. I had never felt such fear when what had happened came rushing back, and I nearly had a second panic attack when my thoughts turned to Lynn. I loved her more than anything in the world. It took me several moments to summon the courage to look in the direction of my laptop. When I finally did, the screensaver had long since turned on. I looked away from the screen as I flicked the touchpad with my shaking finger. It took me another 2 minutes to open my eyes. Lynn laid sleeping in her bed. She looked so peaceful, sleeping on her side, facing towards the webcam. As frightened and confused as I was, Relief at her safety gave me a sense of comfort as I desperately tried to process what had happened. Maybe the wine had hit me harder than I thought. Maybe I slipped and fell on the slick tile floor, and it all had been a nightmare. I stared at her. I loved her, maybe more than even I realized. So peaceful and beautiful as she slept. The light of her television danced across her room and illuminated the bed. As I watched on, her hand began to move. Slowly, unnaturally. She was sleeping, but her fingers crawled across the bed slowly until they reached something. It was her cell phone. Her hand moved like a spider, fingers popping in several directions across the keys. What the hell? Busy. My phone was vibrating. New message, don't. Busy. New message, turn. Busy. New message, OFF. Busy. New message, the. Busy. New message, web. Busy. New message, CM. Complete terror set in as the messages came across the screen of my cell phone. New message, don't. New message, turn. New message, OFF. New message, the. New message, web. New message, CM. As I glanced back to my laptop, horror overcame me as slowly a shadow crept across the floor. Something was crossing in front of the television, moving closer to Lynn. I told myself it was just her dog, right? The color drained out of my face when I noticed the puppy sleeping in the far corner of the room. I picked up my phone and dialed Lynn. I didn't know what I would tell her, but I knew she needed to get out of there immediately and never go back. Damn it, straight to voicemail. That stupid old phone of hers. The full shadow now hung completely over Lynn. Her hand jerked, flipping open her cell phone. My phone was ringing. I answered, Lynn. Lynn, can you hear me? You need to. A burst of loud static forced my phone reflexively away from my ear. On the webcam, I saw Lynn's lips begin to move. Her eyes were shut, but she was speaking. I heard her voice come across the phone, but something wasn't right. She was speaking, but a second, deeper voice echoed hers in perfect unison. Don't turn off the webcam. Agramon would like to see you. Don't turn off the webcam. Agramon is ready for you now. Who? What? What does he want? I yelled in desperation. He wants to eat your skin. The line disconnected. The shadow across Lynn's bed changed directions. It started moving away from the bed and towards her laptop, towards the webcam. As the shadow moved closer, small streams of gray liquid rolled towards the lens. The images coming across my monitor began to shake violently. It was almost here. I could now see the top of its head. It was crawling towards me. Wet strings of silver and black hair hanging over its face. I remembered those hateful eyes, and I lost control of my bladder as it slowly began to tilt its head up. And then I did it. In panic, I slammed my laptop shut and threw it against the hard tile floor before collapsing to the ground. I wished for a panic attack to take my consciousness and end this nightmare, but it didn't come. I crawled to the panel of switches a few feet up on the wall and turned on every light that I could. I noticed the bottle of wine still open on the kitchen counter and drank most of it down in a single swallow. I reached up and pulled open my apartment door and stumbled across the threshold, extending half of my body into the common hallway so I wouldn't feel so alone. A pathetic coward sprawled out on the concrete. My phone began to ring. I crawled to it. Lynn's name was flashing on the caller ID. I held it in my hand, paralyzed by fear. And then the ringing stopped. I took another mouthful of wine and mustered the courage to call back. It went straight to voicemail. And then again and again as I tried to call. Eventually the shock and drowsiness from the wine got the better of me, and I passed out on the floor after making a few more attempts. When I awoke several hours later, despite the broken laptop and empty bottle, I wanted to believe that it was all some sort of horrible nightmare. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw blue flashing light on my cell phone. You have one new voicemail. My hand trembled as I dialed my voicemail and entered my passcode. The message was time-stamped and was from the missed call I had from Lynn before passing out. Her voice. She was in tears and frightened, as though I had never heard her before. You promised. Why? Why did you? Turn off the webcam. His tongue burns. With a crackle, the message ended. 2 years have passed since that night. I never tried to contact Lynn again. I never called her work to see if she came in the following morning. I never made it to Yarrow Point in Washington where she lived. She was my soul mate, and I let this happen. I was probably right on the night we met when I told myself I wasn't man enough for her. The only reason I am telling this story today, under the cowardly veil of anonymity, is because my drug and alcohol counselor thinks it would be good for me. So here it is. I made the decision to let the love of my life face an unimaginable nightmare to spare myself. And the worst part is that I may not even regret it. Now, if you will excuse me. My wife is not the woman I used to know. She let the fame get to her. I met my wife when I was 15 in high school. She was 17. The latter part of my teenage years was probably the hardest of my life. In just half a year, I lost my mother. I never knew my dad, so she was the only family I had. My wife and I were only friends at the time, but she was there for me, grieving with me. I think I started developing feelings for her during that period. We started dating when I was 17 and got married 7 years later. For context, my wife was always very frugal and unmaterialistic. She never cared about clothes, makeup, brands, or cars, always spending money at thrift shops or waiting for sales. I remember trying to impress her with my 370Z, only for her to react with, "What car is this? A Corolla?" So yeah, I think you get the point. But that's what I loved about her the most. She was the most caring person I had ever known. In our family, she was the successful one, always working in big corporations. As for me, I worked as a community first responder for my local hospital. The salary wasn't high, but I loved my job and the fulfillment of helping people. Fast forward 2 years ago, she received an offer from a major company for an executive position, offering 4 times her salary, which was already good. The catch: we would have to move to a different city. At first, I hesitated because it meant losing my job and not being able to contribute financially to our family for an indefinite period. But she assured me that she could effortlessly support us with her new job, and in the meantime, I could take care of the house and groceries until I found new work. She was so enthusiastic about it that I agreed. I was happy to support my wife's career in the best way I could. But what happened next was shocking. My wife underwent a complete transformation. She started caring more and more about luxury, brands, jewelry, cars, and more. Imagine my disbelief when she came home with a Versace bag after years of wearing $10 coats from our local thrift shop. She also started spending a lot of time with her new female coworkers. My wife was never extroverted or particularly social, so this was quite surprising. Still, I was happy for her. I thought she had finally found her place after years of struggling. But that happiness didn't last. She started coming home later and later each day, to the point where even talking to her for 10 minutes felt like a miracle. I assumed she was busy with work. After all, being an executive is demanding. But then she began posting photos with her coworkers, drinking, shopping, and going out. The fun part: she never found time to reply to my texts, yet she always had time to post photos. And when she did reply, she would claim she was too busy working. Then, the biggest shock. Have you ever experienced your spouse leaving for work in an Audi A3 and coming back home in a Porsche Macan GTS? Because I did, and let me tell you, it's no fun. I confronted her, asking if it was a business-issued car. It wasn't. Then I asked why she would spend so much money on a car when she never cared about them before. Her passive-aggressive response? "It's my money, and I'm entitled to do as I please." Or have you ever experienced your spouse not coming home for a night, not replying to texts, only to call the next afternoon saying they forgot, to tell you they left for a business trip? I hope you haven't. But the worst part? The day she invited me to lunch with her coworkers. I was ecstatic. It was the first time in months that we'd be doing something together. I thought that maybe everything I had been experiencing was just a phase, and that it was finally over. She left first because of work, and 2 hours later, I dressed up nicely and headed to the restaurant. For context, I had sold my 370Z years ago since I no longer needed a sports car. My daily driver is a humble Renault Clio. I like it, and since I don't need anything fancy, I never felt the need to upgrade. When I arrived, I parked in front of the restaurant and walked inside, only to see my wife staring at me horror-stricken. She immediately got up from the table, dragged me outside, and proceeded to insult me for parking my Clio in front of the restaurant, in front of her table. She said I had embarrassed her and that I should have parked somewhere hidden. I was completely at a loss for words. When I asked her why, she simply said, "Because it's a cheap, non-luxury car that doesn't represent my lifestyle." Then she went back inside, warning me not to embarrass her like that again. I sat through the rest of the luncheon in shock. That day, I realized that the woman sitting across from me wasn't my wife anymore. She wasn't the woman I married. Right now, she's out celebrating a great year for her company, and I'm sitting at home with divorce papers in front of me. I don't think I can handle this situation any longer. I've tried countless times to talk to her, to tell her how I feel, to tell her that she's changed, that she's not the same woman I knew. But she doesn't listen. She always says she has no time, that she needs to work, or she tries to downplay it, insisting that nothing has changed. She wanted kids. Now she doesn't, because they would take time away from her career. She wanted to travel. Now she refuses, for the same reason. Is she really the same woman I married? And yet, I still can't bring myself to talk to her about divorce. Maybe because I hope that somewhere, hidden deep inside, the woman I loved still exists. Even if it doesn't seem like it anymore. The last train home. Do you ever watch other people in the subway? It's so strange to have to ignore someone who's right up there in your face. A can of sardines springs to mind, except we're not joined by a bond of thick oil or brine, coated instead by a miasma of sweat, cologne, and annoyance. Everybody absorbed in their own little worlds. There, whizzing through the bowels of the city at a brisk clip, you'll find people reading books, newspapers. Maybe on a PlayStation Portable. Maybe on a smartphone. Except me. I'll always be looking through the thick glass windows at the flickering blackness just beyond. There are stranger things in the tunnels than in the cabin. I guess this is the right place to share what I saw that night. It had been one of those weeks. Actually, it had been one of those months where the targets piled up like so much dirty laundry. The boss was on my case. Miserable, balding fart with his mortgage and his European sports car, riding us all for another bullshit project for some client across the country. The days and nights lost their meaning. In at work early to beat the crowd. Heading home without ever seeing the light of the sun. Caffeine was my only friend. I got used to rushing for the last train home because the miserable bastard wouldn't even sign off on the late-night taxi claims. It showed up on the work-life balance indicators, he'd said. It had been another mindless day of numbers, slides, and text. To be frank, I didn't even know if the version of the meaningless report I was working on was the 5th or the 50th, nor could I have told you the difference between the two. The office had already emptied out an hour before, my last co-workers giving me a commiserating pat on the back as they headed off. I cursed as I stuffed my laptop and swept some papers into my bag. I was going to miss the train. The stale warmth of the building gave way to the bitter cold as I hit the streets running. The station was empty. Not unthinkable at this time of the night, but eerie all the same. There's something about a hollow space meant for crowds. I'm not talking about muggers or anything like that. There is an air of the forbidden about these empty spaces. That's how that night started out. Expectant, waiting for something to happen. Not that I cared at the time. The escalators were out for the night. I was wheezing hard by the time I got to the bottom, that old college fitness long buried under an ocean of booze and a mountain of fast food. I thought the last train had already left, resigning myself to a long wait for an expensive taxi ride back. I was about to leave when the train pulled up with the familiar scream of metal on metal. Graffiti adorned the gray skin of the train, tribal tattoos for the modern locomotive. The doors hissed, warm air belched from the cabin. I got in. The train, strangely, was full. Not packed, but it was crowded. I found myself a seat in between an old man in a large brown overcoat and young lady that wearing a dark formal dress, a large flower pinned to her breast, her face a mask of mascara and eyeshadow, inexpertly applied. Across from me sat a pair of army guys in fatigues, their scalps shining pink under their tight buzz cuts, and many more besides. It was a puzzling thing to have a cabin so full late at night, and with such a motley crew of inhabitants. With a shudder, the train pulled out from the station. I settled back contentedly into my seat. The network connection in the tunnels was never dependable. I had to find another way to entertain myself on the ride home. The noise from the screech of the rails and the rush of air outside seemed muted. Instead, the cabin was filled with a soft susurrus, the hushed tones of a crowd in a theater, expectant but subdued. The cabin felt colder than it should have been. Was the heating out again? It couldn't be. I was certain that the cabin was warmer than the platform a second ago. Yet now, it felt like I was back outside in the howling cold. I tugged my jacket a little tighter. I looked at the hodgepodge of strange individuals in the cabin. Everybody seemed out of place. Why would there be a gaggle of high school kids, obviously inebriated, this late at night? Or the waifish girl that was wearing what seemed to be a school uniform? I shifted uncomfortably on the sculpted plastic seat. The other odd thing was that I didn't see a single mobile phone or any other electronic device in sight. I looked up at the row of LED lights that indicated the train's progress along my route. For more stops. I was still staring at the display when the train whizzed by the next stop. It didn't stop, didn't even slow down, just kept going right by the stop. The lights and pillars of the station streamed by in a blur. I jerked upright in my seat, my eyes widening. What kind of train had I gotten on? The rest of the crowd was unfazed by this development. If anything, the low buzz of whispers got even louder as the train progressed. We were still hurtling through the dark tunnel, the overhead lights flickering on and off, when the little girl in the school uniform affixed me with a curious stare. She crept over to the group of high schoolers and tugged at the sleeve of one of the young men. He must have been a basketball player or something. He nearly had to bend double to bring his ear down to the little girl's face. Her jaw worked up and down as she whispered something to him urgently. I heard nothing over the sound of the train. He blinked and took a step back when he looked back in my direction, as though seeing me for the first time. His handsome face twisted strangely. What was it? Anger? No, he looked like he wanted something. He looked hungry. His compatriots noticed the break in the conversation and directed their gazes to the focus of his attention. To me, the same gamut of emotions cycled through their faces. Shock, and then a sharpening, a hardening of their features. They were hungry too. The feeling spread through the cabin, like a spark arcing from person to person. The two uniformed men, looking up and tightening their jaws. The old man next to me, perking up and scooting down another seat so that he could look at me without straining his neck. Outside, a blur of lights told me that another station had shot by. 3 more stops. I shrank back in my seat, the tendons straining at the surface of my hands as I clutched at my bag protectively, as though that stupid gesture, grabbing onto my work, the focus of my life, would ground me and take me from this nightmare. It didn't. I felt the weight of their eyes on me, like insects crawling over my skin. Something was wrong. So clearly wrong. This strange crowd, so different, yet each of them was wearing that naked need on their faces. Don't mind them, they're just jealous of you. The voice of the young lady by my side. Her voice was soft, mellifluous. Don't stare back and don't talk to them. I turned to look at my erstwhile companion. What are they jealous of? I just wanted to catch the last train home. It's the last train home for all of us, too. She smiled. She was very pale, very beautiful. But not all of them want to be here. And looking at you, going home tonight, makes them so very unhappy. Where'd they all come from? Was there a convention? A meeting? I cast my eyes around the cabin again, but was stopped halfway by her strong fingers on my chin. Her fingers were icy cold. She turned my head around to face her. Everywhere. All around. Most of them didn't want to be here. Except me, maybe. I'd had enough of where I was. I miss my parents. I haven't seen them in such a long time. It took a while for me to gather enough courage to go look for them. She paused, suddenly pensive at what she'd said. You're not meant to be here, you know. This isn't your ride. Outside the window, another station went by. My eyes flicked back to the board with all the little lights. 2 stops to home. The whispering in the cabin had started up again. Louder than before, but still muffled by the sounds of the rails and the rushing air outside. They were talking about me. The atmosphere grew oppressive. It was strange, but the attention of the crowd felt like a rock on my chest. My breathing became labored, each inhalation a struggle. My companion sensed my discomfort. I wish I could stop them, she said sadly. It'll stop when we get to the end of the line, I suppose. Her eyes lit up at the thought. She turned around and scooted up onto the seat, her knees on the hard plastic, palms on the cold glass. Even with her face pressed up against the glass, there wasn't a trace of fog on the window left by her breath. If she was even breathing at all. Here, why don't you take this? I won't need it where I'm going. She fumbled at her dress, detached the white flower, and pressed it into my hands. The sweet smell of the lily took my attention away from the pain in my chest. We're here. She was quivering with excitement as the train began to slow. I looked up at the board overhead. All the lights on the map had gone out. Where were we? She cupped my chin in her hands. It was only then, with her arms so close to my face, that I saw the network of fine white lines that crisscrossed her forearms. She caught the flick of my eyes towards her arms. She shrugged, sheepish. "Practice makes perfect," she said. She frowned, suddenly serious again. "This stop is for the rest of us. You can't join us. You have to stay here." She leaned forward quickly and gave me a kiss on my cheek. Her cold lips burned like an ice cube. The people in the cabin quickly turned their attention to the approaching platform. I felt the weight on my chest ease. The whispering grew to a crescendo as they pointed and chattered excitedly. The platform drew close. And what a sight it was. I didn't recognize the tiles or the posters. I must have taken this train 1,000 times. I could have closed my eyes and named every station in order and the time between stations if I wanted to, and yet I was lost. There was nothing on the platform that helped in any way. No signs, no directions. What the platform had was people, a milling sea of heads and faces, all expectant, all eagerly waiting. When the door opened, it let in the roar of the crowd outside. Shouts, shrieks, and yells. And tears, so many tears. The passengers burst out of the train, throwing themselves into the waiting sea of people. I saw one of the army boys embracing an older gentleman, also dressed in military fatigues. None of that new-aged stuff that looked like it was plucked out of a stage of Minecraft. This was old school, with big green and brown blotches. The resemblance between the two was clear. They parted, the younger man introducing his father to his compatriot. The older man hugged him as tightly as he had hugged his own son earlier. The old man that was sitting by me had found an elegant-looking lady in her 30s. Her light sun dress looked out of place for the biting cold of winter. Or had I mistaken the man for someone else? I looked again, and it wasn't the old man anymore, but a young couple laughing in the prime of their lives. No, it was the same coat, and his features, lined with a jealous greed scamp moments ago, were now lit with a fierce joy. Just as the train doors hissed shut, I saw the girl that sat next to me on the train. She was in tears with her arms around a well-dressed couple. She waved at me as the train pulled out of the station. I waved back. My legs shook as I got off the train at my stop. The platform was reassuringly deserted. I watched as the train screeched into the distant darkness of the tunnel. I gingerly touched the numb spot on my cheek where the girl had kissed me. My fingers came away wet. I didn't even remember the tears falling. My nose was suddenly assaulted by a rich, thick greenhouse scent. Decaying plant matter. I fished out the lily from my coat pocket where the strange girl had left it. The pristine white petals were dry to the point of crumbling and speckled black with rot. I let it fall from my fingers and watched it bounce on the station floor. I stared at it for a long time before I began the long trek home. 47 new messages. I just kept running, faster and faster, until my muscles throbbed like an out-of-control dial tone, until the electricity in legs subsided into sharp spasms of pain. I ran down that winding, semi-abandoned street until my lungs burned and my heart pumped pure sulfur. I might have screamed, or maybe my voice just sputtered into a metronomic hum. I don't know. I can't really remember. I ran until I just couldn't run anymore. By the time I'd stumbled into the back alley behind an abandoned strip mall, I couldn't even remember why I'd started running in the first place. Quite frankly, I couldn't remember anything. The few remaining memories of that morning felt fuzzy, distant. I could remember crawling out of bed with a throbbing migraine. I could vaguely recall showering, shaving. Hell, I could even remember the scorched menthol aftertaste of an early morning cigarette. But then, nothing. Everything after that became a blur of half-remembered sounds and images, a bottomless black chasm in my mind. I glanced at my wristwatch and almost gasped. 2:56 p.m. A 6-hour gap. My memories felt distant, ephemeral, lost in the white noise of exhaustion. I kept trying to piece everything together, but just grew increasingly frustrated and confused. What the hell was going on? I braced myself against a grimy, cement-covered brick wall, trying to catch my breath. But I just couldn't take it anymore. My muscles became rubbery and unstable. I collapsed upon the hot asphalt, bending over into a fit of coughs, wheezes, and dry heaves. The sun beat down on my back, and my head ached. The stink of garbage and taste of bile made it damn near unbearable. I felt terrible. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A small, gray, rectangular object lying next to an upturned trash can. Spears of sunlight reflected off its surface and made it look strangely over-illuminated, almost ethereal. For a second, I stared at it in captivated silence. The light off its surface bore into my eyes as I got up, wiped myself off, and went over to pick it up. It was a cell phone, one of those old flip phones, all scratched up and barely held together. As if in a trance, I bent down and picked it up. A weird, unnatural heat radiated between each scratch and ridge, as if they were all deep, infected wounds. The cell phone felt half-broken and fragile, but seemed to momentarily bind itself to my flesh, as if it were a part of me, as if it had always been a part of me. The front screen displayed a single ominous message, 47 new messages. I don't know why, but I became unbearably curious. Why would an out-of-date cell phone tossed aside with the early evening trash have so many voicemail messages? Why had it been abandoned? And why did I feel this strange compulsion to keep it? Hell, to treasure it like some lost artifact. Even then, I seemed to subconsciously know that this old flip phone was somehow connected to my 6-hour gap in my memories. It felt like some invisible force had led me here. God damn it, I just couldn't help myself. I opened up the phone, dialed *86, and listened to the voicemail. Oh God, if only I'd known. If only I weren't so curious. If only I could have broken that goddamn trance, snapped that phone in half, and thrown it away. But I didn't. And this is what I heard. First new message, a loud, throaty scream, frantic and full of terror. A cacophony of cries mixed with the gurgle of spit, blood, and bile. The faint trace of a whimper near the end. The voice sounded tinny, lo-fi, almost distorted. And yet, it also sounded oddly familiar, like it belonged to an old acquaintance I hadn't heard from in years. Second new message. The same voice, only now the screams were muffled and intermittently punctuated with terse, terrified sobs. The sickening crack of bone, snapped in half and breaking through soft, supple flesh. An explosion of panicked, staticky screams and the stomach-churning sound of a body being rent apart. Third new message. Swift, staccato bursts of sobs. The sudden squelch of flesh grasped and torn apart as if it were a flimsy sheet of cellophane. A metronomic hammering sound that steadied into a sickening pulse. Distortion. Static. Human pain. That constant thud grew louder and louder. Everything. Shrouded in an unbearable electronic hiss. Fourth new message. The crackle of static. The breaking of bone. That same broken voice fading into a strained, choked whisper rasping into my ear. A sad, sickening series of sobs and a single plea. Don't let. This thing. Take me. Please don't listen. A shriek of static. Dead silence. I wish I could tell you that I listened to all 47 messages. That I stood there and listened until I had discerned from these disturbing, disconnected recordings some sort of cohesive narrative. But I'm a coward and I couldn't take it anymore. I slammed the phone shut before I could get any further. A cold, nauseating numbness went through my body and the air grew stale. Poisoned. I felt like I was going to throw up. Someone whose still familiar voice reverberated in my ears, had been torn apart, eviscerated. Was this the source of my memory loss? Did I experience some trauma connected with these messages? Oh God, did I watch a man die? Or did I do something I wanted to forget? Panicked, I tried to find some rational explanation for this horrible collection of messages. Hell, tried to figure out some way this might be some sort of sick practical joke. But even then, I knew that this was real. That I couldn't just close my eyes and walk away. I opened up the phone and looked through all the incoming calls. As I had suspected, all 47 of the missed calls came from the same phone number. Hell, as far as I could tell, those were the only incoming calls this phone had ever received. It almost felt like this phone had been designed solely for the purpose of conveying to me this strange and perverse series of message. I took a deep breath. With staking hands, I pulled up the number and pressed send. The phone rang in my ear as I waited for someone to pick up. My pulse quickened into a white, hot frenzy. My palms were slicked with sweat. The surrounding shadows grew into an inky black veil that momentarily shrouded every corner of that abandoned alleyway. 3 rings, then a fourth, and then a familiar clicking sound. But before I could say anything, a harsh, rumbling voice burst out. A ghost of a signal, lost in the geography of flesh and silence, forgotten, a ghost. A wave of distortion. Forgotten words cocooned in white noise. an unbroken stream of language. The voice sounded lost, blinkered, blanketed in the harsh crackle of electricity. But like the voice from those 47 messages, it too sounded oddly familiar. I tried to listen carefully, to figure out who this was, but the static cracked and hissed like thunder, frustrating this attempt. The circuitry of desire, an electromagnetic warmth made flesh desire, desire. Hello, I whispered. I still couldn't identify the voice. Can you hear me? But the voice croaked on, becoming more and more familiar as the static gradually subsided. I tried to listen closely. A desire for automation, a desire for this broken machine of bone and blood. BZZT. This prison of communication. BZZT. It has been far too long. I found this phone and wanted to talk. It is happening again. It is happening again. I will soon. BZZZZZZT. Soon, perhaps one more time. Who is this? Do you know who this phone belongs to? A prison of antennae and satellite signals. But it is happening again. It will be soon, perhaps. You know this. I'm sorry. I don't understand. Don't worry. You will. At that moment, I knew with a sudden sinking realization who I had been speaking to. Beneath the blanket of white noise, the voice became familiar. It was the same voice that had screamed and stammered for mercy in those voice messages. The same voice that had grown hoarse during its final plaintive sobs. It was the voice of the tortured and the torturer, the broken victim and babbling madman. But it was also a voice I'd heard all my life. It was my voice. They were all my voice. This thing was speaking to me now, with my voice. And then I felt the pain. A thunderous jolt of electricity, the sensation of bones cracking, tendons snapping, flesh ripping open into jagged red ribbons. My skin felt flayed, disconnected, and a slow trickle of blood and viscera seeped into my eyes. I could hear the horrible sounds of my body breaking into 1,000 pieces. I felt violated, carved open, emptied out little by little, the cracks and scars infiltrated by a miasmic electromagnetic fog. I couldn't tell if this pain was real or imagined. I didn't care. My knees buckled and I howled in pain. I screamed. I screamed until I couldn't scream anymore. In a fit of desperation, I violently tossed the phone onto the hot asphalt, and the pain abruptly stopped. I became frantic, confused, scared, and I desperately wanted to get the hell out of there. So I ran. I just kept running, faster and faster, until my muscles throbbed like an out-of-control dial tone, until the electricity in legs subsided into sharp spasms of pain. I ran down that winding, semi-abandoned street until my lungs burned and my heart pumped pure sulfur. I might have screamed, or maybe my voice just sputtered into a metronomic hum. I don't know. I can't really remember. I ran until I just couldn't run anymore. By the time I'd stumbled into the back alley behind an abandoned strip mall, I couldn't even remember why I'd started running in the first place. Quite frankly, I couldn't remember anything. No, that's not true. There was an echo of memory, the dull sensation of déjà vu lingering like a ghost. The past receded into a dull ache, a tangled collage of sound and image shrouded in the fog of static. I glanced at my wristwatch. 3:22 p.m. Almost 7 hours. I braced myself against a grimy, cement-covered brick wall, trying to catch my breath. I clutched my chest and broke into a violent coughing fit. I felt confused. Broken shards of memory cut microscope incisions into my brain. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A small, gray, rectangular object lying next to an upturned trash can. It radiated a weird spectral glow in the shadows of that alleyway. It too seemed oddly familiar. The half-forgotten memories became less faint, less impressionistic. But still, I couldn't help myself. As if in a trance, I bent down and picked it up. A weird, unnatural heat radiated between each scratch and ridge, as if they were all deep, infected wounds. The cell phone felt half-broken and fragile, but seemed to momentarily bind itself to my flesh, as if it were a part of me, as if it had always been a part of me. The front screen displayed a single ominous message, 48 new messages.
It was 2022, and I am 24 years old. I am non-binary, assigned female at birth, but let's say I look very feminine. At the time, I was studying in Paris and renting a room in the house of the mom of my boyfriend at the time, in a city that was more than an hour away from Paris, but 20 minutes from Versailles, another important city in France. It was in winter, during a school break, I think, and I was going out in Paris to see a longtime internet friend for the first time. She turned out to be a very toxic and problematic person whom I'm not in contact with anymore, but the story is not about her. I must say that I have a rather petite frame because of an eating disorder I was dealing with ever since I was a child, and I've always looked much younger than my age. Even these days I need to show my ID when I want to buy alcohol. On the day of my encounter with my friend, I was dressed casually with a skirt. Our encounter went very well, but since I lived far away and planning to go to my boyfriend's house later, I had to leave before midnight because the public transportation would become scarce after 10 p.m., and I had around 2 hours of transit to get there. Unfortunately, I didn't leave early enough, so I managed to get a train until Versailles, but would have to wait almost an hour to get a bus to go to the nearest city from my boyfriend's house, where he would then pick me up with his car. While I was waiting near the train station, I noticed a group of bus drivers who were smoking and talking to each other. I approached them to ask which one of them was going to drive the bus to insert the name of the city closest to my boyfriend's house, and one of them, a small man with gray hair, who was probably in his late 40s, early 50s, told me that it was him. He noticed my skirt and said that I must be freezing, so he offered me to go heat myself in the bus and wait there until the time of the departure. I gladly accepted, as I was indeed freezing, and while he was walking me to the bus, which was parked in a very dark corner with no lights, he got very close to me and started to act very familiar with me, asking me about where I live and where I was going to and such. I was feeling uneasy and uncomfortable, but I was raised to be polite, and I've always been a people pleaser, so I answered all his questions with as little details as possible until we reached the bus. He opened the door for me, and while all my instincts were screaming me to not go in that bus, I ignored them and got in anyway. I sat at the front of the bus, where there was a bit of light, but mind you, I am black, and even in the dark it would have been very difficult for anyone to see me, beside from the other bus drivers who saw me leave with the driver. No one knew I was in that bus. Anyway, the second I got in the bus, things got even weirder. He threw his lit cigarette away and got in the bus with me as well, all while telling me a bunch of anecdotes about the bus, about how the bus was actually designed to transport the French football team, and how there was a huge table and even bathroom at the back of the bus, and that I should come in the back of the bus with him to see. He suggested me twice to come in the back of the bus where there were absolutely no light, and this scared me even more, so I texted my boyfriend, "Might no come tonight." Weird bus driver. Call me ASAP, while ignoring the driver rambling. He then came back to the front of the bus and stayed in the corridor, blocking my way. He talked about random things I don't remember, and all the time his eyes were fixated on me, especially on my phone that was in my hand, and my knees/thighs. All the time I was praying for my boyfriend to see my message and call me, and when he finally did, I breathed a sigh of relief. The driver must have seen the face of my boyfriend on the screen of my phone, because he took a step back and told me that he was going to smoke another cigarette outside. I answered my phone and told my boyfriend everything that was going on while looking out the window to keep an eye on the bus driver. When he was far enough, I ran to get out of the bus, only to discover in shock and horror that he had locked the door. I was trapped in that bus, and no one knew where I was except my boyfriend, the creepy bus driver, and the other bus drivers who saw me leave with him. Still on the phone with my boyfriend, I went back to where I was previously sitting and saw through the window that the creepy bus driver was coming back. When he saw me on the phone, he left and locked the bus again. He did this circus back and forth a total of 3 times, locking the bus behind him every time, but the last time he stayed near the bus, so I hung up with my boyfriend and decided to text him instead. At some point I sat on another seat to keep an eye on the creepy bus driver, and through the window I saw and heard an elderly woman who asked him if his bus was going to city nearest to my boyfriend's house, and he deliberately lied to her, telling her that it would be another bus. At this point I was freaking out, frantically texting my boyfriend that I was going to die, that the bus driver would do terrible things to me, then kill me and throw my body away. It was at this moment that the bus driver went back in the bus and locked the door again. We were supposed to leave in less than 10 minutes, and suddenly something finally snapped in my brain. I got up, trying to maintain a calm appearance, and lied to him about how I need to go back to the train station to go to the bathroom. He told me that there were bathrooms in the bus. Then I lied again, saying that I needed some snacks from the vending machine. He hesitated and finally accepted to let me go, but before he did so he pretended twice that the button to open the doors wasn't working, and at this point I didn't care about hiding my distress anymore. I told him that if he couldn't open the door, I'd pick the emergency hammer to break the door, and suddenly the button was working again. I bolted out of the bus and took the deepest breath of cold, fresh winter air I've ever took. I've never been in prison, but I imagine what it feels like to be released from prison. I then ran up to the train station, hid behind a vending machine, and when I finally felt safe, I bursted in tears. I called my boyfriend back, and he told me that he called his sister, who lived in Versailles, to that her boyfriend would come and pick me. While I was trying to calm myself, guess who I saw coming in the train station? The creepy bus driver. He was acting like he was looking for something, or rather, someone, and that was likely me. I hold my breath and waited for him to leave, and then cry some more because I realized at that moment that I was his prey, and I was right about his bad intentions. Finally, the boyfriend of my boyfriend's sister came and took me back to where I live, and I couldn't sleep that night or the following days. My insomnia worsened. I made a signaling to the bus company, but since he wasn't a usual driver for them, nothing was done, and I didn't even receive an answer. I am very grateful for everyone who helped me that night, and I know it has been said before, but let me say it again as a reminder. Trust your guts. Trust your instincts. They're never wrong. Also, FXCK being polite with creeps that make you feel uncomfortable/unsafe/uneasy. Thank you for your time and attention. Stay safe, everyone, and have a nice life.
In the far reaches of the cosmos, beyond the swirling arms of countless galaxies, space explorers from advanced civilizations have long been observing the universe in search of life-bearing planets and intelligent species. Among these myriad worlds, one particular planet has recently caught their attention: Earth. Located within a relatively young star system, this blue-green jewel is home to an array of diverse ecosystems and extremophile organisms. However, what truly sets Earth apart from other habitable planets are its inhabitants. Humans, a species that has rapidly evolved into a Stage 2 civilization. This classification denotes their achievement of harnessing nuclear power, creating complex societies, and developing advanced technologies. However, the rest of the galaxy watches in trepidation as they have also discovered humanity's darker side. The humans are classified as residing on a T-class death world, a planet where life thrives amidst constant dangers such as extreme weather events, geological instability, and most alarmingly, self-inflicted catastrophes. The galaxy has witnessed the destructive power of human weapons, capable of unleashing unfathomable devastation upon their own world. The remnants of nuclear testing sites serve as stark reminders of humanity's propensity for violence and self-destruction. Fear permeates through the cosmos, as advanced civilizations recognize the potential threat brewing on this seemingly insignificant blue dot. The decision is made to keep a close eye on Earth and its inhabitants. Observation posts are established at strategic locations within the solar system, cloaked by layers of stealth technology. From these vantage points, extraterrestrial beings watch as humans continue their development, fearing the day when they may master interstellar travel and unleash their terror upon the galaxy. As time passes, humanity remains oblivious to the cosmic attention directed towards them. But for those observing from afar, a single question looms. Will Earth's inhabitants prove themselves worthy of joining the greater galactic community, or will they become an interstellar threat that must be contained? As centuries pass, humans continue their relentless pursuit of technological advancement. In this period, they make astonishing strides in various fields such as medicine, engineering, and computer sciences. However, it is their progress in military technology that raises the most concerns among the extraterrestrial observers. Humanity's weapons of war become increasingly powerful and sophisticated, with a disturbing capacity for mass destruction. Inventors create an array of deadly devices, including ballistic missiles, nuclear-tipped cruise missiles, and even develop the capability to miniaturize nuclear warheads for use in tactical situations. The global arms race intensifies as nations compete to outpace one another in military prowess. This competition results in vast stockpiles of weapons that hold the potential to wipe out entire civilizations. Each new development is met with a mixture of horror and astonishment by those observing from afar. Despite humanity's brutal nature, they remain confined to Earth due to their inability to achieve interstellar travel. The technological barriers appear insurmountable for the time being, leaving humans unable to directly threaten other civilizations within the galaxy. Nevertheless, this brief respite only serves to heighten the vigilance of those keeping watch. As humanity's destructive potential grows, so too does their influence on Earth. Conflicts between nations become increasingly frequent and intense, often resulting in widespread devastation and loss of life. Despite occasional periods of relative peace, humanity seems unable to shake its proclivity for violence. The extraterrestrial observers are left in a state of unease, uncertain whether humanity's technological advancements will ultimately lead to their self-destruction or the subjugation of the galaxy. For now, they can only watch and wait as Earth's inhabitants continue their relentless march towards an uncertain future. As humanity continues its relentless development of advanced weaponry, the rest of the galaxy grows increasingly fearful and cautious. The rapid pace of technological advancements, particularly in weapons technology, has solidified humanity's reputation as a potential threat. Extraterrestrial civilizations exchange information about Earth and its inhabitants, sharing stories of human brutality and their capacity for destruction. Discussions revolve around the best course of action to contain this burgeoning menace. Some advocate for preemptive strikes against humanity, while others argue for patience and continued observation. The fact that humans have yet to develop interstellar travel remains the only thing keeping them from becoming an immediate threat to other civilizations. However, many in the galaxy fear that it is merely a matter of time before humanity overcomes this technological hurdle. In response to these concerns, several advanced civilizations establish protocols for interacting with humans. These guidelines emphasize caution, non-interference, and maintaining a low profile to avoid drawing unwanted attention from Earth's inhabitants. Some even go so far as to create contingency plans for possible military intervention, should humanity pose an imminent threat. Meanwhile, on Earth, the humans remain blissfully unaware of the fear they have instilled throughout the galaxy. The extraterrestrial observers continue their vigilant watch, hoping that humanity's violent tendencies will not lead to catastrophic consequences for the rest of the cosmos. Despite these apprehensions, there are those who see potential in humanity. A few advocate for engagement with Earth's inhabitants, believing that they could be guided towards more peaceful pursuits. However, such proposals are met with skepticism and resistance from the majority, who view humans as too unpredictable and dangerous to engage directly. And so, the galaxy remains locked in a state of uneasy anticipation, waiting for humanity's next move. Will they continue their destructive path, or can they prove themselves worthy of trust and inclusion in the greater galactic community? Only time will tell. A pivotal moment in humanity's history that solidifies their reputation as a violent and self-destructive species occurs when they use nuclear weapons on Earth. The events of August 6th and 9th, 1945, mark the first and only time nuclear weapons have been employed in warfare, with the United States dropping atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The devastation wrought by these attacks is immense, killing hundreds of thousands of people instantly and leaving countless others to suffer from radiation sickness and lingering effects. The cities are reduced to smoldering ruins, and the long-term environmental consequences are severe. This event sends shockwaves throughout the galaxy, reinforcing the fears and concerns held by many extraterrestrial civilizations about humanity's capacity for self-destruction and their potential as a threat. The use of nuclear weapons serves as a stark reminder of the dangers posed by humanity's rapid technological advancements, particularly in the realm of weapons technology. The aftermath of the bombings sparks debates within the galactic community about how to proceed with humanity. Some argue that this display of brutality and disregard for life is further evidence of their unsuitability for inclusion in the greater interstellar society. Others, however, maintain that it is precisely because of these destructive tendencies that engagement and guidance are needed to steer humanity away from a path of devastation. Regardless of the position taken, one thing remains clear: humanity's self-destructive tendencies cannot be ignored. The use of nuclear weapons serves as a chilling reminder of the stakes involved in dealing with this volatile species. As the galaxy continues to observe Earth and its inhabitants, the hope is that lessons will be learned from this tragedy, preventing a repeat of such devastation in the future. The moment humanity discovers the existence of extraterrestrial life marks a significant turning point in both their history and that of the galaxy. The news spreads rapidly across Earth, sparking widespread fascination, curiosity, and fear. As humanity begins to grapple with this new reality, the rest of the galaxy watches closely, observing how they react to the knowledge that they are not alone in the universe. Fear and uncertainty dominate the interactions between humans and other civilizations, leading to tense situations and standoffs. Many extraterrestrial civilizations, having been wary of humanity's violent tendencies, adopt a cautious approach when engaging with Earth's inhabitants. Diplomatic overtures are met with skepticism and suspicion on both sides, as each party tries to gauge the intentions of the other. In some instances, misunderstandings and miscommunications lead to hostile confrontations. Fearful of the potential consequences, several advanced civilizations consider taking preemptive action against humanity, contemplating military intervention, or imposing strict regulations on their technological development. However, there are also those who advocate for engagement and cooperation with humans, believing that they have the potential to contribute positively to the galaxy. These voices call for patience, understanding, and dialogue, arguing that it is crucial to establish trust between humanity and the rest of the interstellar community. Over time, a fragile equilibrium is established, with cautious interactions occurring between humans and other civilizations. The fear and uncertainty that once dominated these encounters gradually give way to a tentative sense of cooperation, as both parties work to build bridges and find common ground. Despite the progress made, the specter of humanity's self-destructive tendencies continues to loom large over their interactions with the galaxy. The hope is that through engagement and dialogue, humans can prove themselves worthy of trust and inclusion in the greater interstellar society, ultimately shedding their reputation as a volatile and dangerous species. In time, as humanity continues to engage with the galaxy, they are presented with an opportunity to challenge the perceptions held about their species. A group known as the Doctors Without Borders arrives on an ailing border world, providing much-needed medical assistance and resources to the inhabitants. This humanitarian mission captures the attention of the interstellar community, as it offers a rare glimpse into humanity's caring and compassionate nature. The selflessness and dedication displayed by the Doctors Without Borders serve to counterbalance the earlier fears and concerns about Earth's inhabitants, revealing a more benevolent aspect of human behavior. Impressed by this demonstration of empathy and solidarity, several extraterrestrial civilizations begin to reconsider their initial apprehensions regarding humanity. They recognize that while humans indeed possess the capability for violence and destruction, they also have the capacity for kindness, generosity, and altruism. As more humanitarian missions follow suit, the interstellar community starts to warm up to Earth's inhabitants. Over time, trust is gradually built between humanity and other civilizations, paving the way for greater cooperation and integration into the larger galaxy. In the end, humanity's true nature is revealed to be a complex tapestry of both light and darkness, a species capable of great violence and destruction, but also one that can display immense compassion and care for others. By demonstrating their more benevolent side, humans are able to overcome the initial fears and misgivings held by the interstellar community, ultimately finding their place among the stars. A soft hum of the car engine filled the space between us as we cruised down the dimly lit streets. My wife, perched stiffly in the passenger seat, had her arms crossed, fingers tapping an impatient rhythm against her elbow. Please, just don't screw this up," she said, her voice somewhere between a plea and a command. I smirked, keeping one hand on the wheel while the other reached over to pat her knee reassuringly. "Babe, come on. I always make a good impression." Her head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing. "No, you think you do. There's a difference." I scoffed. "When have I ever made a bad impression?" She let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe when you told my mom that I tricked you into marriage because of my deceptively good hairline? Or the time you met my old boss and immediately asked if he knew a guy who could help with traffic tickets. Those were jokes," I defended, turning onto a quieter street. "Besides, your mom does have excellent hair genes. You should take that as a compliment." "Not the point," she huffed. She turned to face forward again, rubbing her temples as though trying to will away the impending disaster she was certain would come. I sighed, realizing this was more than just nerves. It was a big deal for her. This was her new job, a fresh start, and she wanted everything to go perfectly. Which meant that tonight, I had to be perfect. Okay, I said, softening. I promise. I will be on my absolute best behavior. Charming, polite, and completely normal. She gave me a sideways glance, unconvinced. Your version of normal worries me. I opened my mouth to argue, but before I could, we pulled into the apartment complex's parking lot. My stomach twisted just slightly. Not with nerves, of course, but, anticipation. As I turned off the ignition, my wife reached over, gripping my wrist. Please, she said one last time, eyes locked onto mine. This is important to me. For all my bravado, that hit home. I squeezed her hand back. Got it. No dumb jokes, no weird stories, no embarrassing moments. She exhaled, nodding. Okay, let's go. We stepped out of the car, and as we made our way to the building, I let one last thought cross my mind. This was going to be easy. The door swung open, revealing my wife's boss, Marjorie, standing in the doorway with a warm smile. She was a sharp-looking woman in her 50s, dressed in a crisp blouse and slacks, with an air of effortless confidence that suggested she ran a tight ship both at work and at home. You must be the husband, she said, extending a hand. The one and only, I replied with a grin, giving her a firm handshake. First impressions mattered, after all. She chuckled, stepping aside to let us in. The apartment was spacious, well decorated, but not overly fancy. A few framed travel photos lined the walls, books stacked neatly on the shelves. The smell of something rich and savory lingered in the air. Please come in, make yourselves comfortable, Marjorie said, leading us toward the dining area. I took in the space, mentally checking off everything on the good guest list. Clean shoes, no unnecessary touching of objects, no immediate jokes about decorative choices. So far, so good. As we sat at the dining table, Marjorie poured drinks, red wine for my wife and her, bourbon for me. Good sign, I thought. She appreciated the finer things. So, she said, settling into her chair, your wife has told me so much about you. I shot a glance at my wife, who gave me a tight smile, probably bracing for impact. All good things, I hope, I said smoothly, taking a sip of my drink. Mostly, Marjorie teased, raising an eyebrow. Though she did warn me that you have a, let's say, active sense of humor. I feigned offense. Me? I'm the picture of sophistication and restraint. That got a laugh, small but genuine. My wife exhaled, visibly relaxing. We moved into light conversation. How my wife was settling into the new job, Marjorie's years in the industry, and my own work, which I tactfully kept brief and uncontroversial. The atmosphere grew more comfortable by the minute. At one point, I told a carefully chosen story about a work mishap. Nothing too embarrassing, just enough to be relatable. Marjorie chuckled, shaking her head. Well, at least you own your mistakes. Sometimes too well, my wife muttered under her breath. I shot her a playful betrayal. Look, and Marjorie laughed again. This was going great. Then dinner was served. The plates were placed before us, thick, juicy steaks, paired with roasted potatoes and sautéed greens. I gave an appreciative nod. Wow, this looks amazing, I said honestly. Marjorie smiled. Glad you think so. I love to cook, but steak is my specialty. I raised my glass slightly. To steak, then. The three of us clinked glasses, my wife beaming. Perfect. I had this in the bag. Little did I know, that steak would be my undoing. The moment my knife sank into the steak, I knew I was in trouble. I had eaten rare steak before. Hell, I even enjoyed a good medium rare every now and then. But this? This wasn't just rare. This was prehistoric. I pressed my fork down and cut again, hoping I had somehow just hit a bad angle. Nope. The inside was deep red, nearly purple, and cold to the touch. I glanced up. My wife was cutting into her steak without issue, the juices pooling in a way that suggested perfectly cooked medium-rare perfection. Marjorie took a bite of hers, smiling contentedly. Meanwhile, my own plate looked like something that had just stumbled out of a field and collapsed. I tried to keep my face neutral, but internally, sirens were blaring. I had three choices. Eat it, risk a lifetime of chewing, and possibly mooing in the morning. Come up with an excuse. Veganism? Sudden allergy to beef tartare? Find a way to make it disappear. Option 1 was grim. Option 2 was impossible. I had already expressed excitement about the steak. So naturally, my brain latched onto the third. I took a cautious glance around. Marjorie was sipping her wine, unaware of my silent crisis. My wife was deep in conversation about something work-related. Then, salvation. Marjorie stood, wiping her mouth with her napkin. "Excuse me just a moment. I need to check on dessert." "This is it. My shot." I watched her disappear into the kitchen, heart pounding. Time slowed. The air crackled with opportunity. I quickly surveyed my surroundings. Napkin method. No, too messy. Pocket. Absolutely not. Then, my eyes landed on the large, open window just a few feet away. A perfect, clear, third-story window. A cartoon light bulb practically flickered above my head. If I was fast, precise, I could make this thing vanish without a trace. No one would ever know. The plan was set. I grabbed the steak with my hand, careful not to let any juices drip, and in one smooth motion, I launched it toward the window. That's when everything went horribly, horribly wrong. For a moment, I felt triumphant. The throw was perfect, clean, efficient, worthy of an Olympic discus champion. The steak sailed through the air in slow motion, spinning gracefully, heading straight for its target. Then thwack. The unmistakable, stomach-dropping sound of raw meat hitting solid glass. Time stood still. Instead of vanishing into the night, my nearly raw steak had just face-planted against the spotless third-story window. It clung there for a fraction of a second before surrendering to gravity, sliding downward at an agonizingly slow pace, leaving behind a long, crimson smear. I could only stare. My mouth hung open, my body frozen, as if I had just witnessed a murder. Then I heard it, the sharp intake of breath from across the table. I turned slowly, as if hoping this was all a hallucination. My wife was staring at me, her fork frozen halfway to her mouth. Her eyes, which had been filled with polite amusement minutes ago, now radiated a mixture of horror, disbelief, and something far more terrifying, pure, unfiltered rage. There was no escape. Before I could even think of a way to recover, footsteps approached. Marjorie had heard the noise. As she re-entered the dining room, her eyes flicked between the bloody window, the steak resting in the sill, my empty plate, and my absolutely guilty face. She blinked. Once. Twice. Silence. I felt like a criminal caught in the act. I had to say something. Anything. My brain scrambled for an explanation, for a way to undo what had just happened. What came out of my mouth instead was, I'm so sorry. I'm such a klutz. I don't know. I was just cutting it, and it slipped. I looked to my wife for help. She gave me none. Both women stared at me, unblinking. I had failed. Catastrophically. And now, I was going to have to pay the price. The silence in the room felt suffocating. Marjorie stood there, her eyes flicking between the steak clinging to the window sill, the gory trail it had left behind, and my empty plate. I swallowed hard. She tilted her head slightly, her brow furrowed in a mixture of confusion and concern. Finally, she spoke. What happened? I panicked. Words tumbled out of my mouth with the grace of a collapsing Jenga tower. I'm so sorry. I'm such a klutz. I was just cutting my steak, and it just flew out of my hands. Silence. I turned desperately to my wife for backup. She only stared at me, her expression unreadable, except for the slight twitch in her left eye, which I knew meant death was near. I turned back to Marjorie, who was still processing my explanation. Her eyes drifted back to the steak, then to the bloody window, then to the steak again, then to me. I could see the exact moment she realized my story was absolute nonsense. Her lips parted slightly, as if she was about to ask a follow-up question, one that I had no good answer for. I needed to act fast. Before she could speak, I grabbed my napkin and lunged for the window, attempting to wipe away the evidence. Bad idea. The thick, juicy streak of blood only smeared further, making the situation somehow worse. I let out a nervous chuckle and muttered something about getting cleaning supplies. Neither woman said a word. Finally, I knew what I had to do. Defeated, I picked up the steak, placed it back on my plate, and sat down. And then I ate it. Cold, bloody, barely seared. With every bite, I felt my dignity shriveling up inside me. No one spoke. My wife continued to stare at me with quiet, simmering rage. Marjorie sipped her wine, and I chewed, and chewed, and chewed. It was the longest meal of my life. The rest of the evening crawled by in agonizing silence. I sat there, mechanically chewing my punishment, my taste buds waging war against the raw, iron-heavy meat. Each bite felt like an eternity. Marjorie made small talk with my wife, carefully avoiding any mention of the incident. I, on the other hand, sat in quiet exile, my only contribution to the conversation being the occasional forced swallow. Eventually, mercifully, the night came to an end. As we stepped into the car, I turned to my wife, searching for some sign of forgiveness. She buckled her seatbelt in silence, started the car in silence, pulled out of the driveway in silence. I cleared my throat. Nothing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she spoke. 2 words. I'm fine. I have never heard 2 words carry such bone-chilling, soul-crushing, relationship-altering weight. I nodded solemnly, knowing better than to push my luck. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing. A text from my wife. I hesitated before opening it, bracing for impact. Good news, boss name, and I just had a good laugh over how much of a fucking idiot you are. I hope you know you will never live this down. Love you, you moron. I exhaled. Somewhere, deep beneath the layers of humiliation, I felt the tiniest sliver of relief. Sure, I had ruined dinner. Sure, I had embarrassed myself beyond words. Sure, my wife would remind me of this moment at every family gathering, dinner party, and social event for the rest of our lives, but at least still loved me. Even if I was an idiot,